So just as and this isn't meant to point fingers or do anything or just information purposes, but what system do you use right now to manage what you have going on? What kind of a calendar type system do you use? And I know some of us are still doing other jobs, so you may be using something that is provided there. But I'm just curious what you're using as far as the system goes. Anybody? You can unmute and jump in, or you can just throw it in the chat if you want.
I don't have it in front of me, but I use it's a high performance planner that I use that I keep all of my information in, and then I have a big calendar that I ordered off of Amazon that I keep on my wall, and that's just it's a monthly calendar that can be dry erased and redated and redone and whatnot, and of course I use Google uh, Calendar. I use all three of those.
All right, awesome. Thanks, Dan. Anybody else?
Like I still use the old-fashioned way. I have my calendar, my book, and that's how I use it. I try and get into like the Google Calendar and that. I still haven't gotten used to doing that, but sooner or later I will. I know it's a lot better.
Right. Yeah, it is, and the only thing that makes it better, is it's automated. So, and one of the concerns that I have, just based on experience, because this part of this I have been doing since the 80s, right? Because as a Marine recruiter, I went on recruiting duty for the Marine Corps in 82, and we had to manage. I had 6 different schools I was responsible for, all the different activities, community activities, and all the stuff that we had to do. So you had to manage all that. And back then, I used a desk calendar. I carried a things to do list. Of course, back then we didn't have smartphones like we have now, but so it was a little different. But one of the issues that I came across, and I don't even remember who it was that told me about it or where I got it from, probably from Zig Ziglar or Success Motivation Institute, because that's what I was into back then, or got into back then, was to have everything in one place. Everything you do in one place. And that's the reason I love Google so much, the Google Calendar so much, is because I can have all these different calendars in there to keep up with what's going on. Because when the kids were growing up and when I first started in the business, I was using a Franklin Day Planner, which was awesome. Everything, in fact, the kids will joke around about it even now today as adults. They'll joke around about the fact that I was the kind of person that if they told me something and I didn't write it down in my plan, if I didn't write it down in the Franklin, it was gone. It was like in one ear and out the other, right? And or especially the youngest one, he would say, "Dad, we have such and such a school in 3 days," or whatever it is. And yeah, okay. He goes, no, write it down in your Franklin, Dad, because if you don't, you won't be there. Okay. And he would actually stand there and watch while I wrote it down and all that stuff. And that went with me everywhere. Everything I did was on a plan, but it was in the Franklin Day Planner. Today with Google, like it is, you can have all those schedules in there and then systematically work them. And I'm going to show you just real quick this morning. I'll hit that just a little bit, just so you guys can see what I'm talking about with it. Because when we're talking about transaction management, that's a huge part of what we do, And for those of you that are not using a Google Calendar, for example, I have it on my phone. My wife and I share the same calendar. We don't, everything is in one place. But I'm going to show you just real quick what I'm talking about and why I think it's so important that you have something to start with like this. So this is my calendar, for example. And on this one, if you look on the left-hand side where the calendars are, training and teaching, that's in red. What I have that, when I say training and teaching, that's anything that I have locked in and already in the schedule, right? Where I know exactly what it is, what time it's going to start, what I'm going to do. I'll have notes like this one on ABR, on the ABR, for example. I have notes on the side of it, like show why capital title sheet. Anything I have to add to that class or bring into that class that's extra, that's not the typical class, I add that in there as a note so that I have everything together. Because if I don't, at the time I'll forget it because I'm concentrating more on what's going on here or in a large classroom, for example, than I would be somewhere else. So the reason I show you this, I have 4 things highlighted on the side. I have appointments, I have my wife's schedule. So for example, I'll take that out, a new agent training, and then regular training. But you see all the other schedules that are on there, and it becomes what you want it to be. But let's just to give you an example, if I look at the month, take a look at September, just training, that's the training schedule for September. Now in here, for example, I don't have what the topic's going to be yet, right? Where I will, before today's over with, I will have all of, on my schedule, I have all of September and October will be done today and in the schedule. And that way, those of you that are using the Google Calendar, for example, you guys will have that, because right here where it says Remax Elite Training, if I click on that, that will show up on your schedule. Now right here, now you don't see anything on there because there's nothing that's been done to it. If I go back to August and I click on Remax Elite Training, you'll see it added to the schedule right there. So you see duplication because everything I put on my schedule, I copy it over to that schedule, which is for the company in general. And then in addition to that, I also copy it over to the mission office, which for mission being the main office that I work with, we have not only training, but we have phone duty and everything else on there. And that's their entire schedule. And on that one, the receptionist, Yadi, puts it together. That's her schedule is phone duty. And then I copy it over for the agents. I copy it over to this one. So they only have to use one schedule. On their Google Calendar, they go to Remax Elite, Mission Office, and they'll have training and phone duty or anything else we have going on within the office set up there. And it makes it so much easier to use. So my reason for showing you that is when I click on prospecting and phone duty, for example, you can see the little yellow dots open up. This was part of my prospecting plan when as an agent. This was part of it. And that doesn't go anywhere. I keep it there because if I ever need it, I can go right back to that. That's what I want to work from. For sale by owners online at 5 o'clock in the morning, right here, right? That means I would search Craigslist. I'd search Craigslist for sale by owners. I would search Zillow for Make Me Move, things like that. Everything's on a schedule. Because if it's not, it's probably not going to happen the way it should. Just my opinion. And then there's some little things that need to happen that if you don't put them on there, may not. Now I'm going to click on this one that says McFarland real quick. I use that as more of my things to do than anything else. So when you see it, it's going to look crazy. But I can always move things around, right? So that I'm okay with that. I have the day will be packed with things to do. And the reason I want to show you that is because if you look right here, for example, right here, 8 o'clock this morning, print newsletters. This is for the subdivision, print newsletters for the subdivision. That was at 8 o'clock this morning. And that's the ones I talk about where we do Old Republic Home Protection newsletters every month. And then they have to be in the mail by the 5th, for the one my wife does, you'll see right here, mail out newsletters. You know, they have to be in the mail by the 5th. So that's all on a schedule, but I have it on my things to do, because if, like, for example, on the 5th, if I was going to do something else, I can move that over here to the 3rd or something, just to make sure it gets done, right? But it's real easy to work with it. It's not something that's locked in. Real easy to work with. So almost every one of you, when I add you to the company information, I send you a link to that so that you have access to it. And let me just touch base on that one more time as well, if I could. So what happens is, for example, I open up the Remax Elite training, right? Settings and sharings. And then I go down here and I will add people to this, add your email to it so that you guys have access to it. So then all you have to do is, let me pull up. So these calendars that are on the bottom, for example, are not calendars that I normally use, but I have them. One of this is Mission, this is Norma's. So let's say on the 12th right here, she's having lunch at PI, right? I click on it, I click on the 3 dots, and I can now copy it over to my appointment schedule or anywhere else I want it. And it becomes a part of mine, if you will. So when I take hers off of there now, and because I made an appointment, it shows up here like that, unless I plug an actual time in. Right. Any questions on that?
No.
So the reason for showing you that is because when we talk about transaction management, the key part there is, as things happen, you have to keep up with them. And there's different ways of doing it. And all that really matters is that you're doing something that works for you. My wife and I have been married for over 30 years. We do not do the same thing. I use Google all the time. She uses Outlook. But on her phone, she has this calendar so that she has access to it. And that's more so that she knows what I have. And then all she does is she just clicks in, she plugs in her address, her appointments as well. So we have that. All right, any questions or comments there? Anybody?
Fine.
Again, the key is just make sure that you guys have something that you're using, because as you move through this, and we'll go through some of the things with it here real quick. The let's see.
The reason why I use that book, that planner, is that way if I'm out running, I can write it down, and then I come back and put it into my calendar.
Yes, absolutely. And I get that. If this was live, you could see it a lot better, but you can't see it this way, but I use a yellow tablet all the time. And every morning, like around 4 o'clock or the night before, usually the night before, I will print off a schedule. So here's today's schedule, right? I print that off of Google every day because of those same things, Stephen. I don't go into Google during the day most of the time. I don't go into schedule and mess with things unless I have something to add to it. Now, when I was working contracts, it was a different ballgame where I had the calendar open all the time. And the reason for that is every time I got a contract, I want to sit down, and this is what I want to make sure you guys share with you guys today is whenever I get a contract, a listing or buyer I was working with, I would take and plug everything we have going on into the calendar as soon as it happens. So if I had a contract that was, if I had an offer that got accepted, I would, as soon as it was accepted, I would sit down and I start plugging in option period. And if the option period was 10 days, I put a note in on 9 days. And everything would be on the appointment side, right? Because that's where I put the focus at. and the title, when should I have the title commitment, things like that, because you can always move the days around, right? But I need something in there to remind me, because I don't want to leave it up to me to remember it. It makes it a whole lot easier if it's on paper. So just like you're talking about, I'll write things down throughout the day, and at the end of the day, I'll go back in, I'll put changes in, I'll put notes in. In fact, I actually put in Google today things that I did yesterday. So in the morning, for example, or at night when I redo this, when I do the schedule for the next day, which is usually at night, I'll go in and I'll put things that happened throughout the day. I'll put that in there so that I know what was actually accomplished or where there might have been a problem someplace.
So there's actually a way to print out the day, like if what listings or what appointments you have for that day or what you got on the schedule.
Yes. Yeah. Let me, I'll just share this with you one more time, and I'll show you what we're talking about. So this is on the desktop version, right? Not on the phone. But if you have the calendar there, for example, if I was on today's schedule, just as an example, right here at the top where it has Dave, that little gear right next to it, there's your print right there. And,
Okay, good for.
and when I do it, for example, so when I do it, that's all the gray items are things that I would like to do during the day, right? My things to do type of thing, if you will. So when I click on it, I just print everything in black and white. And then I'll highlight things like I have an orange highlighter on this class, for example. I have an orange highlighter on the, I have another one in here with the appointments. There you go. I have other classes in here today. I have a buyer class today at 3:30. And then I have a Remax class at 2. So I'll highlight those all in different colors or all in one color, whatever. And so that I have that, but I print that off every night for the next day, usually. So we have that. And I used to, in fact, actually keep those. I have a binder in there from, I want to say 2007, 2008 of everyday sheets with the notes. And then I stopped doing that. And that's where I go back in and I put, this is what actually happened. So I go everything I do now is in Google. So at the end of today, when I put today's notes in here, I'll actually take this one, reach behind me and throw it in the shredder, and we're out of here. Work on the next one. So, and again, you guys have to do what works best for you, but organization is one of the key things in this. And there's an agent in Mission who's a ball of fire. She's really, really good at what she does. But when she came into this business, I told her one of the biggest problems she was going to have was her schedule, because she's all over the place, right? Just try to carry on a conversation with her and she's all over, but very high energy. And I watched her in a matter of about a 10-minute conversation write things down in 3 different places. And there's no way when you get really busy that you're going to be able to keep up with all that. My last little pitch for it, if you will, when I was with C21, when I first became a trainer with them years ago, the very first class I had was like this. It was about organization, because that's one of the biggest problems I see people with in this business. And I did a survey of the agents that were with C21 with us at the time. There was like 60 some agents at the time. And there were 2 of them that stood out. One of the questions on there was, how do you keep up with, same thing we started with, how do you keep up with what's going on? How do you keep up with your clients, your database? How do you do that? What do you use? And one of the agents said that he uses yellow stickums to keep up with what's going on, what's on his schedule. And I thought, that's crazy. And him and I worked in the same little room, if you will, but I never noticed this. He had one of those large, this is about 2005. He had one of those large computer monitors, and all around the outside of the monitor, he had yellow Post-it notes all over that thing. And one of the other agents on that survey wrote down that she keeps everything in her head. And that was my wife back then. And I kept telling her the same thing I'm telling you. When this takes off, you're not going to be able to keep up with everything. And she ended up in 2007, I think it was. She closed 63 transactions by herself. And you can't keep up with everything. You have to have a system. And like I said, her system is Outlook. She loves it. She won't let go of it. I've been all over the place. I've tried different things. I'm currently using Google and would encourage that because of the platform. I've used Outlook. I've used Goldmine. I've used Act for real estate agents. Use an Excel spreadsheet. A lot of different things. The Franklin Day Planner, right? But anyway, everybody good? So we're going to take a look at transaction management and talk about some of the things, why we're doing this morning, why we even covered what we just covered with it, if you will. And when we're looking at this part of it, one of the things that we look at, and again, this is the momentum package, right? So this is RE/MAX's foundation for training. And they just updated some of the new training with momentum has been added to. I've gone through some of it, but not all of it yet. And we'll incorporate that as we go. So it starts off talking about new listings. As you get new listings, and let me do this as well, just real quick. Let's see. There you go. So there's a link in the chat for this outline, so you guys can open it up and have it if you want it, or open it up and save it so that you have it to look at afterwards if you want. But anyway, one of the first things on here, when we talk about new listings, when you get a new listing, there's things that need to happen. You have to get that. You get a new listing. Somebody says they want, help me sell my property. Well, geez, you have pull tax records. You have to do a CMA. You have to get the documents together for them to sign. You know, information about brokerage services, listing agreement, seller's disclosure notice. You have to get all this stuff together. You get them to sign it. Now you input it into MLS. You have to get a copy of it for the office. And here today, you don't need to get a copy of it for the office because of the systems we use. If you're in Mission, Harlingen, or Port Isabel, you're using zip form. So when you created the documents, we now have a copy in there for the file. All we need to do is make sure it's organized. And you can organize it whichever way you want. So we'll have listing files. Some agents will have a listing file. Some agents will have offers. Like on mine, for example, it'll say listing file. That's everything that pertained to that listing at the beginning. And then I'll have, if I get an offer from Stephen, right? And in there will be everything that pertains just to that offer. If that offer gets terminated, everything that pertains to it will be inside that file. If I get another offer, I'll create another offer. Here's a one from Michelle, for example. It'll say offer from Michelle, and everything will be in that file. And then I'll have the closing folder. And the closing folder will be all the final paperwork, the final contract. So an offer is one thing, but when sorry about that. Offer is one thing, but when it goes to contract, now we have that folder, right? So all the documentation goes with it. Because whenever you get a contract, there's going to be changes from the time everybody initials, signatures, and we communicate acceptance. There's going to be changes. You're going to have almost every transaction, you're going to have amendments to go with it, right? Or repairs that have been done and we need invoices, copies of invoices. There's always additional documentation that goes with it. So the more organized you are with it, the better off you are. And you can create all of that in zip form. And in the Corpus Christi office, they're using .loop, but you can upload all those documents into .loop as well. But for me, it's a little more difficult to create the folder, but you can still do the same thing there. And hopefully next April, Corpus Christi switches over to zip form as well. And all of us will be on the same system. But having all of that organized is so important so that if there's ever a question, you know right where to go to click on it. And if you don't do it when you initially start out, I'm telling you that when you get going, it's going to be, it gets crazy. I made a comment about my wife's, the year my wife wrote all those contracts. Besides her writing those, I had 32 contracts. So we had close to 100 contracts, but just between the two of us. We did not have a team. It was just the two of us hustling. And I'd help her, she helped me. But I was going, my days normally start around 4 to 5 in the morning, and I'll run till 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night and go again. It was good. It was a lot of fun, learned a lot, spent a lot of money. But when you get going like that, you don't have time for little mess ups. So everything has to be organized. And every one of you will do that. The agents right now are killing it with production. It's just amazing with the amount of stuff. Every time I open up, I've got where I don't even want to open my email because I don't know Corpus Christi, for example, there'll be 20 emails in their contracts to be checked. Or if I open up zip form, I opened up zip form yesterday, there were 55 forms in there to be checked. Transactions to be looked at. And so that's the other thing. If you have something as you're doing it and you want it reviewed, submit it for review as you're doing it. There's an agent, I want to say she's probably been in the business about 1.5 years in the mission office. But when she started, whenever she did the listing agreement before she gave it to the seller, she'd submit it for review. So she had information about brokerage services, listing agreement, and seller's disclosure. Is this all filled out correctly? Yes. Good. She'd submit it over to the client. They'd sign it and everything. She'd submit it for review again. So when we got down to her closing folder, all I needed was the final documents. And she has been absolutely great to work with, but we were able to fix things if there's problems as we went along, which makes it a whole lot better than waiting till right before closing and go, oops, I forgot to do this type of thing. Like one of them yesterday, the agent was, an agent yesterday was going to closing today. And the seller's disclosure they had in the file is the wrong one. So on your forms change in this business. Every year we have forms that change, right? The seller's disclosure notice changed September the 1st, 2019. And what Trex said about that seller's disclosure notice is any transaction that's created, any contract that's created after September the 1st, 2019, you have to use the updated seller's disclosure form. In her case, she took the listing in August of 2019, so she used the old one because the new one wasn't available yet. So she had the seller sign that one. But when she went to contract, instead of updating it and using the new one, she used the old one. So I kicked it back. I kicked it back yesterday because this thing's been going on for a while. I kicked it back to her and said, you don't have the new one. I have to have the new one. It's not going to get approved. So she was doing that yesterday, trying to get ready for the closing today. And that can all be eliminated if we just think ahead or submit the forms in advance. We can knock it all out, working together on it. So your new listing, you get the new listing, you make sure you put the documentation in there. You get the transaction gets put together, you get the contract on it. All of that needs to be in there. So not only do we have the documentation, but now we need to plug all these dates in to into our schedule so that we make sure we don't miss anything. On the option fee, on the option period, for example, on the option period, once we have signatures, we have initials, and we communicate acceptance. If we did that today, when does the option period start?
Signatures are today?
Pardon me?
Tomorrow?
Right, yes, tomorrow. Yeah, so the first day would be tomorrow. Tomorrow would be day one. And I swear, because this was yesterday too. Just because there's agents out there that don't, and they will try to confuse you with that stuff. Those go, oh, no, no, no. It started the day they signed it. No, that's not when it started. So you're going to need to know that. And in our Facebook groups, I try to post things in there that you can use as proof sometimes if somebody has a question about it. But you're going to have to convince the other agent that they're wrong, and they're probably wrong in some cases, not all, because that's what their broker is teaching them, because the broker doesn't know. Unfortunately, not everybody stays up to date with what's going on. Just like that seller's disclosure notice, I had one a couple months ago that was out of date. It was the one from 2018, and it was a broker in the transaction. A broker for another office had provided it to our agent, and our agent accepted it. And I kicked it back, said, no, we're not going to do this. Tell them we need an updated seller's disclosure notice. And like I said, it was the broker that actually wrote the contract on it. So they should have known that they had the wrong one, but they didn't. Because a lot of times everybody's focus is a little different, and that's okay. But we just need to make sure that we take care of ourselves. Remax Elite, and we take care of the brokerage as well. So little things like that will get thrown out once in a while, so you have that. So on the transaction management, all the different things you see on this slide are obviously going to pertain to what needs to be done. This, where it says 72 hours and et cetera, we don't have that really anymore because of the fact that we have it in zip form, so it's already available for us as soon as you create it and we have access to it. On the transaction calendar, like I was talking about the Google Calendar when we started with this, some of the things you can look at on here that need to go in there. What's the deadline for the earnest money deposit? How long do you have to get the earnest money turned in? So again, if we had signatures, initials, and we communicated acceptance today is Wednesday, when would the earnest money have to be turned in?
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow?
Okay, but your deadline would be?
3 days, 7 days?
The contract says 3 days unless the last day is a Saturday, Sunday, or a holiday. So you'd have, today's Wednesday, you have Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So actually you'd have until Monday.
Until Monday.
Right? And the way that works is Monday until close of business, because we're dealing with a title company or an attorney's office. So we have Monday until close of business. So those little things like that, that's where the calendar comes in. So that's what I'm saying. As soon as we actually have a contract, everything stops. Let me plug this information in so that I make sure I have everything, because you don't want to miss one of those deadlines. About 8:30 last night, I had a call from an agent. About 8:30, had a call from an agent. Yesterday was the last day of the option period. If the buyer wants to terminate, they have to terminate by when?
Midnight.
It's actually 5 p.m. where the property is located, so in Central Standard Time for us. And he was calling me at 8:30 going, today was the last day of option period, but the seller did not get us, the listing agent did not get us the amendment back. He sent us sent me a text message, said the seller will, they gave him a list and said they wanted 5 things fixed. The seller said, the listing agent came back and said, we'll fix 3 of them in a text, but we have nothing signed. If you look at the option period, it has to terminate by 5 p.m. on the last day, or you still have a contract, you just don't have an option period. You're out of the option period. And he calls me last night and says, what should I do? Well, hope that the other agent will get you an amendment. And the reason, here's what happened with that, just so you know, it wasn't the agent messed it up as much as it was not pushing your people. Because what happened was they got that response back yesterday from the listing agent, but the buyer was at work and said he couldn't reply until after he got off work, which is at 5:30. We're already past the time period, right? So what we should have done when we see we were coming up to that problem is done an extension of the option period immediately. As soon as we see that we're going to have a problem or think we're going to have a problem, extend the option period or request it at least, and see if the seller will allow that. anytime you extend the option period, you have
Mac.
to have more money. Yes, ma'am. Yes.
That's what I was going to ask. Okay, so once the contract, I mean, once the option period was ended, if you didn't do the extension, can they do an additional option period with additional money? Yes, right?
Once it's
Like
ended.
create a new option period?
No, not once it's ended.
Right, once it's ended, like the way this one did.
No. So like in the case I was just describing, his
Like the
option
one that
period,
ended.
his option period
Exactly.
was his option period was over. You cannot extend something when it's already over. So that should have been done prior to.
Right,
You do
right.
it, you
So
do it
at
prior.
that point, the other agent I'm sorry, so the other agent at that point, once it was already over, can they get a new option period with
No,
additional money
no,
if the buyer agrees? I mean, if the
No.
seller agrees.
no, no. It has
No,
to be. It has to be done prior
a new
to
option
expiring.
period cannot be.
No, you can extend the option period as long as it's still in the
No, no,
option.
no, no.
I'm just asking if it's already ended.
Mac, that's not what I'm asking. Okay, that's what I'm saying is once it's ended, okay, I understand that, you have to do it prior if it's going to extend, but we're not extending. It ended. So at that point, if the seller agrees, a new option period, be created with new additional money?
Where are you going to do that at? Where in the contract does it say you can do that?
Okay. No, that's what I'm asking. That's what I'm asking. Okay,
Yeah,
so this
it's
option
not.
period ended. Okay, it ended,
Right.
right?
It's over.
So at that point, can they add an additional 5 days, 10 days, whatever, with additional option money? Can they get a new option period? That's what I'm
No.
asking.
And the answer is no. No, they can't.
No?
No, ma'am.
Okay.
See, the
Okay.
option period, the way it's built into the contract, is an unrestricted right for the buyer to terminate. It doesn't have to be for repairs, it doesn't have to be for anything. It's an unrestricted right. And with everything we do, there has to be a deadline, right? Listing agreements, buyer rep agreements, leases, everything has to have a due date, if you will. The option period is one of those where it has to have a due date. It doesn't have to be 5 days, 10 days. It could be 20 days. You can have an option period for whatever the two parties agree to, but and as long as you pay for it. And if you do an extension, it has to be done prior to it expiring. It's just like right now, one of the biggest arguments we had 2 years ago in McAllen, because I'm the MLS chair over there also. One of the biggest arguments we had was the listing agreement specifically states that it ends on this date. It ends on this date. So if it ended yesterday, I don't have the right today to bring it back active. If I was going to bring it back active, I should have done that. If I was going to keep it active, I should have done that yesterday. You can't make something active again. You can relist it and start all over again, but you can't redo something that's already ended. And that I had that several years ago from Texas Realtors attorneys. And the reason for that, the reason I'm sharing that is because almost everything we have, there's only 3 exceptions to that in the contract, in the residential contract, where it doesn't have, or dealing with residential, where it doesn't have an ending date that is absolute. It's over on that date. And most of those end at midnight, like Stephen was talking about. The option period is the only one where it has to be taken care of before 5 p.m. Okay. And any of those questions, and if you have questions about any of that stuff, don't hesitate to ask. I'll do what I can to answer it for you. And if it's not making sense to you, or you don't agree, that's okay too. I can usually pull that if I don't already have it in our Facebook pages. I may have it in. I have another training by training by Mac group as well. I have things in there. Most of the things I have there already in our company training as well. But usually if I have an issue, I'll just go to Trek or Texas Realtors or NAR's website and find what we need to show this is what it is, so we have it in writing. Because a lot of people like to argue about that stuff all the time. And they swear up and down they're right. But one of the other things you can do to try to help with some of this as you grow with it is on a monthly basis, you should be getting the Trek Advisor. And that'll just tell you what's going on with Trek. But at the very bottom of that, it has disciplinary action. And if you click on it, it'll show you what people have gotten in trouble for over the last 30 days or over the last month. And I look at that every month. And in fact, I use it for some of the classes as well when I'm doing professional development, for example, the professional standards. I'll go in and pull some of the cases out of there so that we have something to take a look at. And you can see how little things like that created a problem. And an option date is one of them there's case studies on where it wasn't extended properly and et cetera. And that's why I mentioned the money. On the money part of it, Trek has talked about it, and Texas Realtors has talked about it, the attorneys, that if the option period is going to be extended, there has to be a fee paid, and it has to be more than $1. $1 is not sufficient. But anyway, so anything else there, anybody? Sorry about that. Didn't mean to get off track like that. We're talking about transaction management. You see some of the other things that are on here, ordering and scheduling inspections. I would ask you not to, I think almost everybody with experience would agree with this, do not order inspections yourself. Let the buyer order them, provide them with a list of inspectors maybe. I teach the ABR course where I recommend you have a list of buyers, a list of inspectors to give to the buyer. And we do that with the inspector information sheet. Make sure that those get ordered and that you stay on top of it so that you don't have issues with option periods. That's why, like with a buyer, for example, you should have a consultation session. Like when you first meet them, maybe not the very first time, but first, second, third should be your consultation. This is the way the process works. And then you go into, okay, let's write up an offer, see if we can get a transaction together. And then you have the closing part of it. So there's 3 parts of working with that buyer. And each one of those requires certain forms, if you will. There's a form in Zip Form that says it's information from other sources, just as an example. Information from other sources. So as you're gathering information from the tax records, from MLS, or wherever else you might be getting it, RPR, as you're gathering information for the buyer, that form goes with that, and you attach it. You put a note on there that says, where did you get the information? I got it from Cameron CAD, for example, CameronCAD.com, .org, whatever it is. You staple those together, and then you have the buyer sign off on it. That's to say that that's so that you can tell the buyer that the information I provided, if it's not accurate, I'm sorry, but I've done the best I can. I'm not responsible for information from other sources. And it was created just for that purpose. All right, so you have some other items on here, deadlines for contingencies, sale of other property, maybe financing contingencies. All of those things need to be put into a calendar so that you don't miss anything. Because once again, that's what we don't want to do. We want to stay on top of what we have going on. Then you take a look at escrow, what's happening with the escrow, make sure the escrow's done. We have 2 receipts in the contract, one for the contract itself and one for the money. And again, we're not going to jump ahead with this, but when we talk about possible changes, know that the 1 to 4 family contract, well, all the contracts, stand the possibility of being changed before the end of this year. So here you are just learning them, and then all of a sudden they're going to change them again. But that happens every year, like I'm saying, every year something in this business to deal with documentation changes. So we just need to get used to it. And I'll do, as long as I'm with you, I'll do everything I can to make sure that you guys know about it in advance. But make sure the escrow gets in there, the contract gets to the title company, the earnest money gets there, or to the attorney, whoever's doing it. Make sure the money gets there and it's good, so we don't have any problems. That last one here is the final loan process for the buyer. If you have the buyer, your job is to monitor that loan process. Monitor the lender, please. I was maybe not that good with lenders because, and title companies, to be honest about it, because I'm of the belief that we're both working together. I'll do my job, you do your job, we'll be okay. What I found was that if I don't call them, my file may stay on the bottom for a while. What's that old saying about the squeaky wheel or whatever, right? That's the one that gets the attention. And unfortunately in this business, it works like that. So you have to have them in your tickler to call them and check, did this happen? Did that happen? Et cetera. Because otherwise it may not go the way it's supposed to. Talk to some of the agents. You'll hear agents say, well, it took us 45 days to close, or it took 60 days to close, or whatever. And you'll see other agents say, we closed in 20 days. Part of that is them staying on top of it, them being the agent, staying on top of it. When our son did his tax vet loan, they said it'd take at least 60 days to close it, and we closed in less than 30. But his mother was his agent, and she was on the phone every day with people. Is this done? No, why not? Let's get it ordered now. And the next day, she'd be calling people, did it get ordered? Did it get taken care of? You know, those kind of things. You have to do that for your buyers, which is why she's a really good buyer's agent. On the bottom of this one, for example, we talk about the buyer's final loan process. Need to actually pencil that in, because the same thing goes with the buyer needs to deliver some documents to the lender. There's a laundry list of things they need, right? Pay stubs, for example, bank statements. They need to get all that stuff over to the lender, but the buyer may not have that sense of urgency. So know that when the buyer talks to the lender's going to ask them to bring that stuff in. So on my calendar, yours, I hope, I'm going to put in there 2 days from now, follow up with lender on John Smith. Did he get the documents in? And if he didn't, what do we need to do? I've been doing this since 97. There's only one time where I got so fed up with it. I called the buyer and said, look, do you have the documents that need to go to the lender? Yes. I'm going to come to your house. I'll pick them up. I'll take them to the lender for you. Because he kept telling us, oh, I'll take it tomorrow. I'll take it tomorrow. Oh, I had to work overtime. I had to do this. I had to do that. They don't have that sense of urgency. Do they want to buy a house? Yes. But is it a big deal? It'll be okay. So we have to sometimes take the bull by the horns and make that happen. Inspections, make sure the inspections happen on time so we don't have any issues there. Make sure we stay ahead of the ball game. Inspections, what repairs need to be done? Did we get the estimates if they need estimates? Are we getting them completed? Do we have documentation that they were completed? Sometimes that is nothing more than the buyer going out going, yes, I like that, it's okay. Sometimes it may be the inspector going back out. If it's in the appraisal, it may be the appraiser having to go back out. You know, there's more than just one moving part to this. And a lot of times, unfortunately, again, we cannot take somebody else's word. We need something in writing. So if the seller says, yes, it's fixed, listing agent calls and says, yes, this is fixed. Can you send me a copy of the invoice showing that it was paid? And that way I know that it's fixed and I know it's been paid. Kinda. For me, I still want to put some eyeballs on there. Either mine, the inspectors, or the buyers. Just because I have something on paper doesn't necessarily mean that it was completed. And we've seen that over and over. And most of it's minor things where the seller pays the contractor, but the contractor doesn't do the work the way they were supposed to. The seller's disclosure, we've already talked about that a little bit. Know that the seller's disclosure that we have is a residential seller's disclosure, right? We need to make sure that we have that and on both sides of the fence. So if I'm the listing agent and Martha has the buyer, she's going to get the seller's disclosure off of my listing off of MLS, right? Because that's the way it should be done.
Mhm.
So her as a buyer's agent, she can download it off of MLS. She has the buyer sign it. We're good to go. But I need a copy of that. If I'm the listing agent, I need a copy of that seller's disclosure that her buyer signed. That's for protection for me and the brokerage. There was a situation a couple years ago that cost an agent $16,000 in our mission office because they did not get the buyer's signature on a seller's disclosure notice. And the buyer moved into the house and said, this house has problems. Why didn't you make me aware of it? And the agent's like, well, we had the seller's disclosure notice and he had it, but he never had the buyer sign it. And the listing agent, which is what we had, never got a copy of that back. So there's no way, had he pushed it, then we'd have made sure the other agent did their job, right? So it created a heck of a mess. And of course, the buyer saying we didn't tell them and all that stuff. Anyway, it cost the agent 16 grand. You don't want to get caught up in that. So financing contingencies, loan approval. We talked about that a little bit. If they want to sell a house in Houston before they buy a house here, that's financing contingency. We need to make sure that we have that everything there documented and know what's in that amendment. In the addenda that goes with that. You have a kick-out clause and et cetera. We want to make sure that we have those things in there and the dates so we don't miss anything. Preliminary title report. This handout says that you'll normally get a report within 5 to 10 days, which is absolutely true. But if I don't have it in 5 to 10 days, like on my schedule, I normally had 3. I put it in there for 3. From 3 days from the day I dropped the contract off, I'd usually get one from the title company I used. If I didn't have it, I'd just call them and, hey, what's going on with this? What's up with it? Oh, you'll have it tomorrow, Mac. Not a problem. Okay, great. I need to be able to look at that so I can advise the client which way to go. There may be things there that they're not aware of. And I know that seems stupid. You'd think if they were the seller, they would know. But I had an individual that had, I'm going to say 6 liens on his property. It's 5 or 6 liens on his property. He swore he didn't know anything about. And there were liens that weren't supposed to be on his property. So there's a good possibility he didn't know anything. His business had gone through bankruptcy, and the supplier for the business, which is not supposed to happen, but the supplier for the business filed liens against his personal property after the bankruptcy. And so what we did was we got that cleared up, and title company just pulled them off so they don't count. But that's one of those things. You have to look at those documents as well. Make sure you have it covered. That's on the preliminary title report. Make sure we take a look at that. Make sure we look at Schedule C is what we want to look at more than anything else. Take a look at Schedule C, see what's on there, make sure the names match with what you have. So when we look at this, so here's your little schematic, if you will, on the seller signs, right? We have our listing agreement. You have your MLS input. On the MLS input sheet, when you input a listing into MLS, it's a real good practice to actually have the seller acknowledge that. So for just as an example, what I used to do is I print them off and I take them over there because I always told the sellers I'd be back in 3 days to pick up the seller's disclosure notice, right? That was one of my always type things. In 3 days when I go back, I take a copy of the MLS sheet with me, ask them to look it over and have them sign off on it saying they agree with everything that's on there, right? So that way, if there's ever a complaint about what I did or didn't do as far as marketing goes, I have their approval on the MLS sheet. Today, emailing that to them and ask them to review it, let you know if it's okay or if it needs changes, you'll get a response take that response, put it in a PDF file, and upload it into zip form so that you have it just as a record, or wherever you're keeping that at, dot loop or whatever. But that's the MLS input sheet. For example, if there's anything extra with the seller, make sure we have that. Lead-based paint addendum, any other issues that may go on there. What if there's personal issues? There may be, occasionally there may be issues that you have to document. Seller selling a property, they went through a divorce. One of them we had was they were going through a divorce. I'm sorry, they went through a divorce. And she was allowed to live in the property. She was allowed to live in the property, and he was making payments. Like, good deal. She's living in there. He's making the payments on it. If they sell the property, then he gets half plus whatever he's paid while she was living there, right? So we needed, for title, we needed a copy of that divorce decree to say this is the way it's supposed to be broken down. Because as far as title is concerned, they do a payoff to the bank, and we have this much money left over. Now what do we do with it? So we had the divorce decree to be able to say, okay, here's how it's supposed to be broken down. And the title company will take and do the math on it for you. But that's documentation you need to have. So anytime you have something special like that, that's the other thing. Anytime you have a question with something like that, my go-to is always to the title company. See, San Jacinto Title here in Harlingen, Adela, for example, there's times where I walked in and say, Adela, I have a question for you. And I'll throw out the question. She'll go, hold on a second. Let me just call the attorneys. And we'll do she puts on speaker, and the three of us sit there and talk about what we have and how we're going to get it worked out. So, but have a go-to at a title company. If you have not met anyone at a title company, get out and meet them. And I would recommend meet a couple of them, because not all title companies are the same. There's some title companies, if I had a choice, I would not do business with, just because of the way they do business. But that's not always my choice. And there's also some Stewart Title. I worked with Stewart Title for a long time, but I took a transaction to Stewart Title, and they looked at it. We talked about it a little bit. A day later, they called me and said, Mac, you're gonna have to take this someplace else, because we've been told we can't close this. And it was based on legal issues with property taxes and stuff like that. So they were told by their legal side not to close that transaction. I took it to another title company. They closed it, no problem. But, all right, so you've had a chance to look over any of these items jump out at you? Anything on here you see that's important, or you don't understand, or have questions about anything on the slide?
I'm sure I'll have some later.
Yes, sir. That's okay. Usually answer the phone up until about 10:30 at night, so it's okay. All right, so we'll take a look at the next slide then. This is on the buyer side. And I used to teach pre-licensing. I used to tell them it's not as easy as people think it is. You get your license and you just tell people buy and sell property. It's real easy. Yeah. Look at all the documentation you have to do, all the things you have to balance. But it's a lot of fun. It actually is. On the buyer side, when you look at this, same type of thing at the very beginning, they sign their buyer rep agreement. We have 2 buyer rep agreements in the company. So you can choose whichever one you want. You can ask other agents, get their preference. I always used the Texas Realtor buyer rep agreement. I always use that. I joined Remax, and Norma has a buyer rep agreement that's 1 page. I went through it. I'm like, for me, there's what I call holes in it, but that's because I'm so used to this one over here. Today, I'll tell you, even my wife uses the Remax buyer rep agreement. It's just easier to go over. You don't have to cover all those items if you feel comfortable with what you're working. And that was drawn up by an attorney, so it pretty much covers everything. It's just, it cuts down, instead of a whole paragraph trying to explain it, it does it in 1 or 2 words. Makes it work. So you have a choice. You can use either one. One of the other differences in them is that the Remax one has a $150 transaction fee built into it. And that transaction fee goes to the office, and depending on which office you're with, depends on how that works, from what I understand. But and you can ask the manager of the office about it, or Norma when you see her. All right, on here for the buyer side, if you take a look at some of this, so for example, let's say we have the closing part down here at the bottom. Ensure that the following is done before the buyer signs. Before the buyer signs. One of the things that's on here is review the buyer's closing statement. We're talking about the closing disclosure. Take a look at it. Make sure it's okay. Make sure there's nothing missing on it, right? And then you have scheduled a signing appointment. You need to schedule that for the buyer. I don't let title companies or mortgage companies tell the buyer what they're going to do. I'll take care of that for them. But you can do it whichever way you want. I will tell you that if you're not proactive, title companies, mortgage companies will communicate with the buyer and you won't have any idea what's going on. In fact, when I first joined the mission office, there was an agent there that was mad as all get out because the title company closed the transaction and never bothered to call the agent. So they were not there for the buyer. And you should attend all closings. You should attend all closing. Buyer side, listing side, doesn't matter. Attend the closing in case there's any questions that come up, right? But anyway, so what one thing is missing from here that might need to be added in here maybe? You see anything on the closing side or prior to? So one of the items that you want to make sure happens in here is the buyer's walkthrough inspection. Buyer's walkthrough. That's usually 24 to 48 hours prior to the closing. 24 to 48 hours prior to closing. You want to do a buyer's walkthrough, right? And there's a form for that where they sign off, they accept the property as is. There's two parts to it. They did inspections, did not do inspections, yes or no. And they done inspections, they did a walkthrough or they didn't do a walkthrough, and they accept the property as is. That's the basic sheet. That, along with your inspector information sheet, which says they choose to get an inspection or not, helps cover you if anything goes wrong. But doing that buyer walkthrough, that needs to be done prior to closing, prior to the buyer signing. There's a manager in the Corpus Christi, there's a manager in one of the Corpus Christi offices that used to be a manager here in Harlingen. And we had a transaction together, and she called me about 9 o'clock in the morning and said, the buyer's going over to sign. The buyer's going over to sign. When's the seller signing? I said, they're signing at 2 o'clock, but I'm just curious, when did buyer do their walkthrough? Because I hadn't scheduled anything. Since I was a listing agent, I should have known that. She goes, oh, well, we'll do it after they sign. And about an hour later, my phone rang and she was not real happy. North? What happened was she got into the property with the buyer to do the walkthrough, and there were appliances missing. There were appliances missing. In MLS, I had put in there that the refrigerator, washer, dryer, freezer was going to convey. That's what MLS said. Washer, dryer, refrigerator, and freezer was going to convey. We had 3 offers on that property. 2 of them had a non-realty items addendum. Hers did not. Prices were pretty close. My advice to the seller was take this one and sell the items because they don't want them. Sell the refrigerator, washer, dryer, and freezer. to make up for that difference, and you're going to be right there. You'll be about the same net on it. And that's what they did. So she did her walkthrough and those items were missing and she was really hot. Not my problem. Her and her broker came and visited our broker. I'd made our broker aware of it that we had at the time. And her and her broker came to visit. They left. They didn't look too happy. I'm sure somebody bought some of that for the buyer, but it wasn't me. Not that time. So non-realty items addendum is really, really important. Doing the walkthrough to make sure everything's there is really important. Anybody have any questions about any of those? Nope. All right, so based on all of this, can you guys see that there's a lot of things that you need to try to keep up with when we talk about transaction management? And if you are, if you're looking at some of this as far as trying to get things going, there's deadlines on almost all of this. Lead-based paint addendum. If the buyer waives the inspection, they waive it. If they decide to do an inspection, there's time periods with that. You know, almost everything we have has a time associated with it. And what we want to do is make sure that we don't get caught up somewhere because we missed something. But I'll also tell you that if that happens, the very first thing to do is address it. Don't hope that it'll go away, because it won't. It just snowballs. Right. Anybody have any questions over anything we covered today?
Mac, I have a question.
Sure.
What about inspections? On the past transactions that I have made, I tried to make it to the inspection day. Is that okay? Can you hear my question? Do I go to the inspections with, I'm with the buyer,
Right.
and I try to go to all the inspections just to talk with the inspector person,
Right.
just to be knowledge what I know he's going to send me a report, but I want to be beforehand just to talk with the buyer. Then is that okay or not?
Yeah, actually, when it comes to buyer's inspections,
Mm-hmm.
if you're taking an ABR course with me, for example, you'll hear me say, I believe that you should attend every inspection.
Okay. Perfect.
And that's the way we've practiced. That's what we were taught. And we've practiced that and it's been beneficial.
Okay.
Especially if they're first-time home buyers.
Mm-hmm.
But in general, we'll attend every inspection. If we cannot, for some reason, be there for the entire thing, then we'll certainly be there to start off with,
Mm-hmm.
and then probably at the end. Because sometimes those inspections will take 2 or 3 hours.
Yes, I know.
And that can get really time consuming. I've done a couple of those. In fact, I sat in on one for my wife one time where we just sat at the kitchen table. What we tell the inspector is, we're going to go ahead and stay here while you're doing the inspection. But if you don't mind, if you see anything that really needs to be fixed or called out, if you'll let us know about it so that we can go up and take a look at it either at that time or when you're done, so we can take a look at it while you're here so we understand what we're talking about.
Okay.
Looking at pictures it just doesn't always work. There's been times where we've gotten pictures and said, what the heck? And then we have to go take a look at it again anyway. But yeah, we highly encourage you to take the time to be there for them. The other thing is, we have some wonderful inspectors. One of the inspectors my wife uses, he's really, really good. But occasionally all that goes to his head. And he's actually told buyers, when we weren't there at the beginning, he's actually told the buyers, he introduces himself and he says, I want you to know that my job today is to find enough stuff wrong with this house that you don't want to buy it.
Oh my God.
And what he's trying to say is he's going to do a thorough job, but it scares the dickens out of the buyer, right? So if you're there, he won't say that. So, all right.
Okay.
Anybody else? And if you have the if you have the listing, you don't necessarily have to be there for
No.
the inspection, but the buyer needs to see. We actually tell the buyer to be there also.
Yes,
But if
I
it all goes.
already, I advise the buyer to be there, especially if he's an engineer and he's very picky. I always say, you need to be
Sure.
there
Yeah,
for your questions.
absolutely. It works. Any other questions? Linda, you've been really quiet out there. You got tons of experience with this. Anything you can add in there to them for them?
Um, I usually don't attend the inspections, but the buyers are always there, and I get everything coordinated. And I stay close involved. Seemed like there was something that you'd mentioned earlier. I wanted to comment on. I'm gonna have to see if it comes back to me. I'm not remembering right now.
Okay.
But no, it's all good information.
Appreciate it, man. Thanks. And
Mhm.
also for the rest of you, Linda's in a different market. I mean, we're in South Padre Island. Your consumers are a little different maybe than they might be in some of the other areas. My buyers on average were 80,000 and below. So like the inspections, for example, the reason I want to be there is they've been told all kinds of garbage, and I want to make sure that we don't have any problems. And being there with them, and when the inspector says that something minor where the vents aren't connected in the ceiling. Like one of the houses we had, the vents all ran to the attic, and there was a vent on the top, but they weren't connected. They didn't actually go out. They just went to the attic. And the inspector made that sound like it was a really a bad deal. Um, Most of that stuff like that can be fixed. One of the listings, I'm sorry, one of the properties that I had a buyer for, where we terminated during the option period, was when you went into the attic. The inspector did the inspection. He came down and he said, the only thing I would be concerned about is the house is settled, and the center beam upstairs, there's boards that are no longer connected to it. The center beam has the rafters in there, right? Nailed in. And the house had settled so much so that those had pulled out, and the nails were completely visible. You could go like this between the nail and the board. They were that far apart. So that's not structurally sound. That needs to be fixed. But that was the one I had a buyer for. It was a really nice house, really good deal, right on the corner, pool and everything. And we bailed on it because it's too much work trying to put that back together. And if there's that much settling now, what's the future going to bring? Type of thing. So, but being there gives you a chance to take a look at some of that rather than just looking at pictures. All right.
I have one more comment about the inspectors. As well as getting to know your title company people, you need to know your inspectors. And some do a far better job than others with furnishing photos and all of this and their thorough reports. There's nothing wrong with being thorough, but where I draw the line is when the inspector starts giving information to the buyer like, yeah, this is going to have to be fixed sometime in the future. You know, he needs to stick with his report
Right.
and not try to forecast the future because that also can frighten buyers.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah. And I appreciate that. That's another one. And they may make it sound like it's a bigger deal than it really is. And everybody here knows what are the GFCI outlets are, the ones to stop you from being electrocuted around the kitchen sink, bathroom sink, things like that. One of my reasons for attending, and this is where it actually came up initially, one of my reasons for attending the inspection is I lost one of my very first transactions because of the inspector talking about how this doesn't have this. Somebody's going to get electrocuted. Somebody's going to, in this house, is going to get shocked, electrocuted, shocked because of the water. And the house is unsafe and all this. So the buyer's like, no, I want out of it. And I didn't attend that one. That was one of my very first ones. So ever since then, that's why we focused on being there. You just never know sometimes. And when you talk about the difference in inspectors, also get to know that in our area, in Harlingen, for example, We have an inspector who's also an engineer. His name's David Day. He's a little more expensive, but if a house has a crack in it, sheetrock or the outside, the brick veneer's cracked or whatever, and the buyers are concerned, we will tell them there's a list of inspectors. The bottom one is David Day. He's an engineer. So because the house has a crack that you're concerned about, hire him to begin with. Just get it over with. Because if you go with the first one, he doesn't charge very much, but what he's going to say is there may be structural problems, so hire a structural engineer. So then you're going to end up paying him anyway. So just hire him to get it over with. And in fact, one of the properties my wife has on contract, they just used David Day to do an inspection on the property, just because of things like that. And he'll tell them what the issue is, if there is an issue with it, or how to fix it to keep it from being an issue in the future. He's really good at what he does, but he charges like $850 for the inspection, or normally you can get them done for $300-400 or less. All right, anybody else? All right, well, I want you guys to have a great day. If you have anything, you can always reach out to me. I'll do what I can to help you. And especially just getting started, zip forms, any of that good stuff. And if I don't respond, shoot me a text. A lot of times I have a schedule that I try to work with. But if I'm teaching class, like tomorrow, I have a class that I'm doing. So early in the morning, I'll check contracts probably, and then get in the class, and I won't check contracts again until probably Friday, just to give you an example. But if you ever need anything, it's now, just shoot me a text, and whatever I'm doing, I'll stop and take care of it. All right? You guys have a good one.
Thank you very much. Have a great day, and I'll see you tomorrow. Oh, hey.
All right. Thanks, Steven. Hey, you're taking that ABR course. Yes. It's cool.
Yeah, I am taking it.
All right. All right. We'll see you guys.
Okay,
care.
thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.